Hello, my name is Letícia Marinho, and along with Gabriela, I'm going to present this study called Accessible Virtual Exhibitions of Brazilian Science Museums, Mapping Themes, Strategies, and Challenges, developed by Jéssica Norberto Rocha, Marcelle Pita, Willian de Abreu, Gabriela Heck, Taáte Tomás, and I. We'll include audio description throughout our presentation. I'm a Brazilian white woman with pale skin, short blonde hair, and brunette eyebrows and eyes. I'm wearing glasses with round black frame, a nose piercing, and a black shirt.
And hi, my name is Gabriela Heck. I am a Brazilian white woman with short straight blonde hair, brown eyebrows, and blue eyes. I am using a white shirt with a blue coat and a white background. Now Letícia will start the presentation and I will continue later.
Our video image is located in a circle in the bottom left corner. The entire presentation has a white background, black text, and all our colorful elements fall within the color scheme with blue, yellow, pink, orange, and green. All textual information will be included in our speech. This study was carried out by the research group Accessible Science Museums and Centers, MCCAC. In the top left and right of the current slide, the name and logo of the event and our research group, respectively. In the bottom right, an illustration of a computer screen with the map, Saturn, and a dinosaur skeleton. The COVID-19 pandemic brought challenges to engage science museum audiences. In the left, information regarding Latin America and the Caribbean. 3 percentages are presented in different colors over slim oval graphs with gray backgrounds. The size of the colorful part follows the percentage. In the right, a faded Brazil map. According to a report by ICOM, out of 168 institutions, 52% were closed by October 2020. While the internet became the main means of communication between museums and their publics during the pandemic, almost 50% stated dedicating only 5% or less of the overall budget for online activities. Virtual exhibitions are amongst the solutions adopted by museums to continue to dialogue with their audiences. 38% started or intensified their offering after the pandemic. The first data are now faded. Below it, 2 percentages presented in other colors. Norberto Rocha and contributors, through a survey with 109 institutions, stated that 80% of them had websites, but only 32 provided at least one accessibility resource. So, engaging online communication and providing accessibility are still very challenging for Latin America and Caribbean museums. The information regarding Latin America is now faded. Highlighted in the right, information of recent investigations about Brazilian museums professionals and the many struggles faced in the field. Mental health issues, as anxiety and overburden, follow the uncertainties aggravated by the pandemic, since most of them work under temporary contracts, as well the new online work dynamics brought in 2020. On top of that, the lack of proper training and experience in accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities lead to insecurities and poor communication processes. In 2017, the publication of Latin America and the Caribbean Accessible Science Museums and Centers Guide brought together information about physical, visual, and hearing accessibilities in 110 institutions located in 10 countries. You can access this and related publications through the QR codes on the left or the website bit.ly/MCCAC publications. On the right, the Latin America map in gray and the Brazil map above it, each of the 5 regions in a different color. 69 out of the 110 institutions are Brazilian, distributed unevenly across the country. 4 of them are from the north, 14 from the northeast, 3 from the central-west, 37 from the southeast, and 11 from the south.
I will continue the presentation with the methods. The next slides follow the sequence. 3 circle topics placed horizontally. On each slide, the current topic is emphasized and the others are faded. To understand how science museums have applied assistant resources in their virtual exhibitions, we first mapped the virtual exhibitions. This phase took place between June and July 2021 and considered the 69 Brazilian institutions that are available into the Guide to Accessible Science Centers and Museums in Latin America and the Caribbean. We search for virtual exhibitions on websites and social media from the terms virtual visit, virtual exhibition, and virtual tour in Portuguese. After identifying the virtual exhibition offered by each institution, we move on to the individual analysis of each one. In this slide, the circle number 2 is emphasized. For this, considering predefined categories such as assistive resources, institutions, and geographic location, and categories that emerged from the data, such as theme of the exhibition and types of media. It is noteworthy that the type of media used in the exhibition directly influences the appropriative assistive resource for application, an aspect considered in this study. The circle number 3 refers to assistive technology, and we consider alternative text, audio description, screen reader compatibility, sign language interpreter in Libras, the Brazilian Sign Language, keyboard navigation, sign language translation software, narration, Portuguese subtitles, English or Spanish version, and contrast and font size adaptability. Now I'm going to talk about our findings. This slide shows in the top right a chart with 3 columns and 1 line. The initial search on the website and social networks of the 69 Brazilian science museums analyzed resulted in a total of 110 virtual exhibitions in 30 science museums. 9 of these exhibitions were excluded from the analysis because they had unavailable access during the search period. Thus, of the 101 exhibitions considered, only 88 had at least one of the evaluated assistive resources, being offered by a total of 24 museums. The slide shows below the chart 2 maps, like the previous one, side by side, but with only 4 Brazilian regions in colors. These 24 museums, in which we identify virtual exhibits with at least one accessibility feature, are located in 4 regions of the country, with the exception of the Midwest region only. The Southeast region has 64 accessible virtual exhibitions in 19 museums, corresponding to 72.7% of the total of 88 exhibitions. And the Northeast region has 12 accessible virtual exhibitions, and the North region has 9 exhibitions, and the South have only 3. The results related to the themes are represented in a horizontal graph with 9 rows in downward size and with different shades of blue. Most of the exhibits analyzed were focused on the areas of life science, with 38 virtual exhibitions, and humanities, with 17 exhibitions. This result is consistent with the fact that most of the analyzed museums are science and technology museums. Regarding to the type of media available, most of the virtual exhibitions were presented in the format of image and text, which means 42 virtual exhibitions, or videos only, like 21 virtual exhibitions. 10 exhibitions presented a combination of these 3 media, video, text, and images, and only 8 had consisted of 360 images. The category of assistive technologies are also represented with a horizontal graph. Only 88 of the 101 virtual exhibitions presented some action or accessibility resource, and most of the exhibitions, 83, had at least the keyboard navigation resource. High compliance with this criterion was expected as the feature used the website HTML code for navigation. And this aspect also applies to screen reader compatibility. 62 exhibitions were found to be compatible after testing with the NVDA software, and the 29 exhibitions offered narration in Portuguese, and only 13 had Portuguese subtitles. In 7 expositions, there was the possibility of changing the contrast and or the font size. Only 6 offered windows with interpreters or translation software for Brazilian Sign Language, 6 had audio description or alternative text in images. It is important to emphasize that in these findings, an exhibition could have more than one feature.
Even though our findings aren't positive, there are outstanding virtual exhibitions regarding accessibility that are worth mentioning. We selected the one called Exposica Affecting Lives, developed by Oswaldo Cruz Foundation. In the left, a QR code that leads to the English version of the exhibition. You can also access it through the link expozica.ficruz.br/en. Now, we'll present a short video of the previous exhibition mentioned and highlight the accessibility resources provided. On the right, there's a button that opens the VLibras software that provides automatic Brazilian Sign Language translation of the textual information of the exhibition. On the top left, a button with options as font size and contrast adaptability and to underline links. Moving to another section of the exhibition, there's an embedded video with subtitles and Brazilian Sign Language interpretation. Lastly, back to the top left button, a link that redirects you to the audio descriptive version of the exhibition. In this version, the exhibition is organized to optimize the experience of the screen reader users, and the same videos of the first version are included, but with audio description. Now, back to the presentation. Organized in 4 vertical topics, we'll discuss the good practices in virtual exhibitions accessibility that we consider being the important factors that led to a successful, inclusive activity. Firstly, accessibility is an institutional policy of the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, and Exposica was developed after this policy's publication. Also, accessibility was considered as a starting point and was a part of the planning of the exhibition all along. Exposica was developed by a qualified, multi-professional and diverse team, including professionals with disabilities. And lastly, financial support to enable its construction.
Some considerations are that the accessible Brazilian science museums are already a limited portion considering the total number of Brazilian science museums. And of these, only 27.3%, which means 24 of 88 museums, develop virtual exhibitions with some kind of accessibility, as discussed before. With regard to accessibility features, the low availability of content in Libras and content with audio description is especially worrisome, as almost all the exhibits investigated were composed of text in Portuguese and visual resources. The most recent data indicate that there are about 7 million people with visual impairments in Brazil and more than 500,000 users of Libras. This lack of accessibility in the virtual environment can aggravate the historical distance that these groups suffer from museums. The analysis of assistive resources available in the virtual environment is possibly a reflection of the reality of the whole of museum educators. As Norberto, Rocha and collaborators show in a 2021 research with about 300 Brazilian museums educators, there is a long way to go towards inclusion. Almost half of the educators have never received specific training in accessibility and inclusion, and most do not work with public with disabilities on a regular basis. Added to that, there is still difficulty in training museums educators to work in virtual spaces. The implementation of assistive resources in the virtual environments depends on the hiring of qualified professionals and, above all, the involvement of people with disabilities. Some immaterial barriers can prevent the disabled person from participating in virtual exhibitions. This can occur through the low publicity of the existence of virtual exhibitions, the failure to communicate about the presence of assistive resources in them, the lack of accessibility in some of the stages of communication, the low institutional engagement to identify their audiences and how they assess museums' virtual environments. Here are the references used in this presentation. You can access them all in the QR code in the right corner of the screen or on the website bit.ly /references MCCAC. You can also find this full presentation and a document with all description at this link. And this slide is dedicated to present our research group, the Accessible Science Museum and Centers group. We are showing the logo of the MCCAC group. That is a colorful spiral with the abbreviation and the name of the group, and the name of our coordinator, Jessica Norberto Rocha, and her email is jessicanorberto@yahoo.com.br. And you can find more information in the QR code or the link grupomccac.org. Thank you all for the attention.
Feel free to contact us. We'll be happy to hear from you. Thank you so much. Institutions of science museums and centers. We collected these institutions in the Latin America and Caribbean Accessible Science Museums and Centers Guide. And through their websites and social media, we searched for virtual visits, exhibitions, or tours. And the main part of our analysis consisted in looking for accessibility features that were provided in these online exhibitions, and such as audio description, screen reader compatibility, and Brazilian Sign Language interpreter, among others. We found originally 110 exhibitions and ended up analyzing 101 because that was the number that was that we could access and visit. And we unfortunately found that most of them only provided screen reader compatibility and keyboard navigation, which was expected because of the nature of the HTML coding of the websites and the web pages. So, and we found that most of the exhibitions that had some sort of video didn't have Brazilian.
I think Letícia is frozen.
Of the images and videos. So,
Letícia, sorry, could you repeat it like the last two phrases because you froze?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No problem.
We found that very few of them provided audio description and textual description of the images or videos. And also, we found that narration was a feature that was not available always in the Portuguese narration, of course. And we saw that most of the exhibitions were not accessible, or at least there were very few accessibility features, and which is a very concerning fact because the Brazilian population of persons with disability is very big. We have a lot of Brazilian Sign Language users here in Brazil, and we have a lot of persons with visual disability that are internet users, and that could be welcomed if these exhibitions were accessible. So we found that we have to keep searching and keep digging, and we expect that these results and these considerations can help other museums and science centers to build more accessible virtual exhibitions.
Thank you so much, Letícia, for being very very good in time. So now I ask Marcelle, please, could you make your comments? So we will have plenty of time after the three presentations to questions and some conversations, and including for the other co-authors also can bring some comments, okay? Marcelle, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Marcelle Pita. I'm a PhD student in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I'm advised by Luisa Massarani in my doctoral dissertation. And I describe myself as a Brazilian woman. I have light brown skin, dark brown eyes, and the same color to the hair. And I use dark blue glasses and a pink shirt. And we will present on the video the deaf people visiting science museums. I study about museum experience in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. That is a part of my results from the master's thesis. And it's important to comment that it's important research because of the historic exclusion of the deaf community and deaf people in the world, and especially in Brazil. And we have in Brazil some laws and norms to guarantee the social inclusion and the human rights from people with disability. But the reality is more complex than we know. So we decided to study about how it works, the experience of deaf people in science museums. So we started this project in 2019, and we invited 4 young deaf people to visit 3 science museums. They were sign users. They studied in the National Institute of Deaf Education. There is a special school to deaf people. So they were studying there about a project of accessibility in cultural institutions, and they knew about some concepts we were searching for. So it was important their knowledge to start this project. We visited 3 science museums, and we hired an interpreter of Brazilian Sign Language to follow with us. And we have also museum mediation to speak about the exhibition and show to them what the narrative the museum wants to pass. So we visited the Botanical Garden of Rio de Janeiro, the Light Energy Museum, and a temporary exhibition, the Accessible Cities, from in the Museum of Life. We recorded the visits and video with a subjective camera, and we used the point of view of the visitor to record that. And also we used a second camera of the researcher, because they were sign users, so they used the visual to communicate. So it was very important. And we interviewed them after that for know about the accessibility issues, the science aspects. We wanted to know how was the experience they faced in those museums. So the results were transcribed. We analyzed the content of the conversations. We analyzed the interactions they have with the group, with the exhibitions, and about the accessibility indicators we use it to know about the physical accessibility, communication accessibility, and attitudinal accessibility. And with that, we showed in the video some results about the lack of a specific science about science in the Brazilian Sign Language, which can be a professional inclusion way to the museums for include deaf people in their staffs. And sorry, I'm nervous. And we saw too that they used previous knowledge to communicate in science museums. They used their habits, their previous experience to discuss with the mediation in the museum, because they wanted to understand the content, the science content, with their knowledge, the common knowledge. And the third principal result, it was the attitudinal accessibility that has to be improved in these museums, because these creation of new policies to include these people can improve the availability of assistive resources, the importance of multiple explanations and multimodal and interactive exhibits, because these different tools can improve the inclusion for more publics, especially to the deaf people in the science museums. So it's this.
Thank you so much, Marcelle. We will have plenty of time for questions and conversations after. And Taráne, now it's your turn.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I apologize in advance. I am slightly under the weather. And for the record, I am a white woman speaking about inclusive informal science education in museum contexts. I do not work in museum contexts. I am getting trained now as a philosopher of science with an interest in public engagement with science. And this project comes out of a dialogue with the local museum center here in Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Museum Center. And it also came out of a workshop that was looking at informal science and other measures of public engagement with science. And one of the patterns that I noticed was that, at least within museum contexts, put more broadly, there's a lot more literature on inclusion, and particularly cultural inclusion, and a lot of decolonial resources are included. Coloniality is discussed, but very rarely in the context of informal science education. And so my project was trying to think about, from a theoretical perspective, what could we do, or how could we tackle informal science education with some of these critiques from decolonial resources and museum resources that are already trying to address inclusivity in terms of incorporating ways of knowing, and not just ways of knowing of the senses, but ways of knowing culturally, linguistically, and different histories. And so this project, basically, I'm proposing a criterion in the sense that when it comes to informal science education, there is a tendency to think about including others in the science rather than focusing on portraying science as a collective project that comes out of many histories and many cultures. And so there's this wonderful opportunity for designing more informal science education activities that are much more embedded in these other museum spaces that have already kind of embraced some of this ways of knowing discourse, and have been working with local partners to sort of improve the general representation. And for example, in the talk, there is a Cherokee pot activity, which is an integrated activity with storytellers telling the histories of the pots, how fire is made, or how fire came to be. And then an activity that asks students to think about what these different scientific aspects like conductivity, how they could be measured without instruments, just with their senses, particularly tactile and visual senses, and then asking students to do this very proactive activity of designing their own cup holder based on what they learned about Cherokee pots. That is just one example, but I think there's an opportunity for a lot more examples of teaching science with reference to different histories and bodies of scientific knowledge. Particularly thinking of ways of knowing as not something that is binary and like an either or kind of dichotomy. So not thinking of science and ways of knowing as like one switch and another switch, but thinking of them as overlapping. And that overlap is something to be explored, to be critically reinvestigated, and sort of recovered. For example, the Potawatomi people would often hold that sort of plants communicate through sort of various networks. Science dismissed that at one time, and then science later said, oh wait, plants do actually communicate via fungal networks. And the problem there is that if we're not careful, we will still present science as validating other ways of knowing. And that is sort of the problem and the challenge in designing these activities, such that it's not just about including ways of knowing in science, but also making sure that they are presented in such a way that's not including the ways of knowing as something other, but incorporating them as part of the science and part of the learning process.
Thank you so much, Taraneh. So now it's time that we have a conversation. So if some of the co-authors want to talk, or if the other participants want to raise questions, if you want to turn on the video so we can see how your faces is nice. If you don't want, no problem. So anyway, is there someone who wants to say something, raise a question? Silence.
I can start that.
Okay.
Taraneh, I was very happy with seeing your video because it was very inspiring. I was thinking about my work, that it's about the deaf community, and they have here in Brazil a non-culture of that community. So they have they share very many stories, many behaviors, and what we wanted to explore that with the accessibility issues in the museums. We were thinking about have these people contributing with the science museums. So I was thinking that has a relation with our works in that way, because we wanted more visions, more points of view in the museum to see science as they see, because it's a different experience, a different way to explore the world because of the lack of the hearing. So I was thinking about that when you are speaking of your presentation.
I'm glad that you found that inspiring. And I think that's a really interesting way to take it. I mean, ways of knowing is often used in these contexts of sort of coloniality, but ways of knowing also kind of touches on the sense of how we just have different ways of, we are learners in different ways, and we experience the world through different senses. And so I think that's a very neat connection. And I guess, like, my question is, what would be, or have you seen any good activities that really focus on a sense that might be kind of a fun way to explore a scientific principle? For example, earlier today, there was some showcase of some French museums and how they did like a day where like no one was really communicating through speaking, but they still had to learn different things, and sort of setting a theme and like really focusing on a specific way of exploring. Are there any activities that you have seen come to mind or have been suggested by sort of the communities you're working with?
Well, sorry, I don't work in museums. I'm the same with you, I think, but I was just researching about the museums. But I realized it in my visits that the accessibility is not always thinking in the museum, but some aspects, some tools they use it to all the publics. It's interesting to the deaf people. In the Light Energy Museum, as an example, they had a bill of energy to explore with the visitors, and that was interactive. So they used that as a deaf visitor to understand better what is the narrative of the museum, what the mediation wanted to pass with that. So I don't know if it's something that we can explore more, but it's the interaction. I think it's the better way really to do this, to make things work together. So I don't know if it's an answer, but something I realized it.
Letícia, please.
About Tenere's question, I remembered that in the botanical garden we have in Rio de Janeiro, there's a sensorial garden that they have a lot of different plants with different textures and scents and sizes, and it's built to so that people can explore with their hands and with their other senses other than the vision. And all the mediators in this section are persons with visual disabilities. So when we go there to visit, we are invited to put a blindfold and explore the gardens so that we can have another experience, and the mediators there have a visual disability. So it has, I think it is kind of like what you mentioned. It's a different experience through their perspective, and they are not only the focus of the activity, but they are the mediators. They work there, and it has this different space that people with disabilities didn't used to have.
Rachel, you are mute.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Should I introduce myself maybe?
Yes, yes, it's a great idea.
Okay. So my name is Rachel. I'm actually from Rio, from Brazil. I did my...
There are a lot of Brazilians here.
We're everywhere. Yeah. I did my bachelor's at the Federal University of Rio, and I did the specialization course in popularization of science at Museu da Vida. So it's nice to see everyone, a little bit of everyone from my past to here, kind of like, oh, feeling at home. But I'm really interested in your presentation, Tarane. Am I pronouncing right? Tarane? I'm really interested in this perspective of ways of knowing, and kind of like how to bridge this communication, and especially in a sense of where like a lot of ways of knowings come from, like have this deep roots in cosmological or mythology related to different cultures, and just like how do we deal with that? Like, I love your example with the mycorrhizal action between the trees, and like how do we convey the scientific knowledge in that sense of like, oh, fungi and plants connections with more cosmological ways of knowing things, and like how do we, I think it's like a very delicate balance. There is a book that now I can see can be very problematic, but it was something that I always wanted to look into. It's called The Tao of Physics, which I think it's pretty much that. It's like translating all this philosophical, cosmological ways of interpreting the world, and the author makes the translation literally to what that means, and like what do we understand now in physics of those knowledges could be related to. And now I can see that it can be very problematic. And I'm just like wondering, how do we deal with that tension? I think that balance, that I think it can be very delicate.
Yeah,
So
go
Nora,
ahead.
if
Yeah. It's you, yeah.
Okay.
It's you, Taverna, sorry.
Okay. So I think that's a really lovely question. And I think there are two things I can immediately point to as like things to always keep in mind. And so in decolonial literature or post-colonial literature, the importance is focusing on the local and not to sort of overgeneralize and sort of put everyone who isn't part of a dominant cultural group into like an other bucket. And so whatever question you're trying to sort of tackle, or whatever micro outcome you're looking for, that should always be done sort of in dialogue with whatever local is the relevant local. And the second sort of major consideration is translations are fine, but we always have to think about the power balance. Who is doing the translating, and what does that mean when, say, someone like me translates, for instance, something from Turkish, which I did do in my past life, and tries to explain sort of the religious beliefs or sort of these more cosmological beliefs to a dominant group culture or an audience in a dominant group language. And so those are just things that are quite tricky. And I don't think there's like one simple answer, but paying attention to the power balance and paying attention to representation, work with communities, making sure that there are equal stakes. So for example, in the lightning talk, which I did not mention here, Claire Smith and a few other authors introduce an intellectual soup model. And so thinking about intellectual products as soups. So oftentimes you have a researcher who is trained and in sort of these scientific methods that represent also colonizing cultures, dominant group cultures, and then you have sort of local collaborators who bring in very important information without which the science or the research could not be done. And so rather than having a model of extraction, where the researcher is in power and they extract the information and then they have the control about what happens with that research, who benefits from it, having much more of an intellectual soup model is to say, well, actually all these people are in the same kitchen making the same soup. Therefore, there should be like equal rights to the benefits of this soup and the intellectual credits of this soup. And again, it's a very broad model, but I think that's an important criteria to think about when addressing these situations.
Thank you. Gabriela.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm also from Brazil. I am from Porto Alegre in Rio Grande do Sul. And I work together with Letícia, Marcelle, and Jessica in the work about the virtual exhibitions. And I just want to say to all the three presenters today that all the works are really, really good. The three of the works are really related. We can see it. And I just want to share one experience that I have. Listening to Letícia talk about the Botanical Garden, I remember that here in Porto Alegre we have the Museum of PUC-RS, the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio Grande do Sul. And in the exhibition, the sensorial exhibition, there's an exposition that is written in Braille with the points. And while you slip your finger to the points, the translation appears in the screen. So it's I think it's very cool. You know, I don't know Braille, but I could learn a little bit by passing my fingers through the exhibition, and the translation appears on the screen. So I remember about this when Letícia talked about the Botanical Garden and also about the work of Tereni, right? So that's it.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? I was wondering, sorry.
I'm sorry, Luisa, you can.
No, go ahead, Letícia.
I find it very interesting that even though we work with different focuses and different groups, we can always find this sense of otherness. And an example, me, Marcelle, Gabriela, and Jessica, we work a lot with accessibility, and we, by our contact with people with disabilities that are professionals in our fields, in the museum fields or the education field, we always hear them talking about this experience of being the other one, of not belonging, and always being in this position to be brought in, not to produce their knowledge or not to share their experiences, but to be invited to the works and the studies, and not being the main focus or the main character. They are always the focus, but not the character of these works and studies. So we always remember their motto, that is nothing about us without us. So I think even though our research focus is very different, we can still make these connections, because the sense of otherness, and even more farther away, the perceptions of coloniality and decoloniality and so on can be also related to how people with disabilities are perceived in our society. So very, very nice.
Sarah, do you want to say something, Voice? You are very welcome. I'm seeing your comments in the chat. If you prefer to leave only the comments, there is no problem. But if you want to turn on your audio and talk, you are very welcome. Okay. Okay, no problem. We wait for your comment. I was wondering, Marcelle, maybe you could talk a bit more about the exhibition Accessible City, which is fascinating, and why we choose it. Maybe it could be nice.
Yeah. Well, one of our visits were for the Museum of Life in Rio, and they were to a temporary exhibition. They didn't visit the all exhibition of the museum, because they are a huge museum and a space with many types of exhibition. But these temporary exhibition were important to the deaf visitors, because of talking about the disability in a city. They had in the old exhibition, it was prepared and have consultant, I think it's the word, of people with disabilities, to build the contents, the objects they displayed in the space. And they were talking about many places in a city, like a park, a school, a bus, and how people with disability can explore these spaces. So they could explore not just as a deaf people of a deaf visitor, but they could experience as people with wheelchairs, or put a blind a blind tool to experience the visit in different ways. So all the exhibits had tablets with Brazilian Sign Language and subtitles. All the content were built with the objective to be inclusive to many publics. So it was very interesting because they were participating of this exhibition, but the visitors could recognize the consultors and be represented in that exhibition. So it was a comment of them. So it was really nice to see what is an exhibition prepared with people with disability, as Letícia said. So I think it's, if you want to speak, Luisa, more about that, it's okay.
No, I'm only the moderator. Other comments, questions? Yes, go ahead, Tarane. You are mute.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just typed the summary of the question, and it's basically, do either Marcelle and Letícia have some things to say about work with focus groups in terms of when these things are designed? Again, going back to that sort of power relationship and representation, like when the decisions are made and when the spaces are designed, what role do like the actual communities being represented, or the communities whose inclusion is like part of the exhibit design, what role do these communities play as authorities and as creators or contributors to the content?
Do you want to start, Letícia?
Okay. I personally never had this experience, but we some of the exhibitions we analyzed had people with disabilities as part of the contributors and the staff that built and programmed the exhibition. So, as an example, the Museum of Life exhibition, Zika Affecting Lives. We mentioned this exhibition in our pre-recorded video. This exhibition had a long list of participants that worked on the exhibition, and some of the participants that worked in the exhibitions are people with disabilities. They are consultants in accessibility. They are professionals in the area. So they work with museums, they work with educational purposes, and they were a part on the programming the exhibition, and analyze the audio descriptions, the Brazilian Sign Language translations. So, and this exhibition particularly was one of the most successful in accessibility matters that we analyzed, at least out of the 101. And we had we accessed also a study that was, I can try to leave the link here in the chat in a few minutes, that they mentioned how virtual exhibition, accessible virtual exhibition was created, and they mentioned that people with disabilities worked throughout the process of building the exhibition. So we find that it's very crucial that people with disabilities are participants and work not only in a volunteering to visit the exhibition, but working by contract to provide not only the inclusion of the visitors, but the inclusion also of the people with disabilities that have experience in working in this area.
Marcelle, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little about the difficulties to contact deaf people in Brazil. So it's very hard to find them and to communicate with them, because many of them just communicate with the Brazilian Sign Language. And I have learned about that to can communicate a little, but I feel of that, but it's very hard to invite them to visit, but not just to visit, but to evaluate and to participate with the museums. I participated to the both works with Letícia and mine about the dissertation, and in we are working in other projects, and we had many people wanting to in the museums to have people visiting them to help to improve the museum or the accessibility, and they don't have this contact, so it's very hard to make the bridges and make research with this community, you know. So I think in a group to understand better or to improve the museum, it has a big barrier in that. And really it's about the communication, and we have a law in Brazil that recognizes the Brazilian Sign Language as an official language, but people doesn't comprehend that. So we are trying to understand, to learn, but it's a process, and this is very, very slow. So I was just considering about that, because talking and working with people, deaf people, it's very hard in this sense.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. So if nobody wants to say something, I guess that we are reaching the end of the session. It was really fascinating. I loved the 3 presentations and the conversations. So well done. And thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who also participate. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful weekend, all of you.